trying to wrap your head around cloud infrastructure, it can feel like you're staring into this massive machine, constantly changing and evolving.
Yeah.
And, a big chunk of that machine today is powered by Microsoft Azure.
For sure.
It's incredibly powerful. I mean, we all know that. But honestly, sometimes it can feel a bit overwhelming.
Right.
So that's exactly what we're tackling today.
Okay.
We want to make Azure clearer, and give you a sense of control when it comes to this platform.
Absolutely. And I think a great way to do that is to dive deep into the foundations of how Azure is built.
Right.
How it structures its resources across the globe, how subscriptions work as those access keys and billing units, and maybe most importantly, how to keep a grip on those cloud costs.
Yes, please.
So think of it as sort of like revealing the blueprint of Azure so you can confidently build and manage your presence in the cloud.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah.
So to guide us through this deep dive, we have a comprehensive guide to Azure cloud architecture. It's going to be our roadmap today.
Okay.
All right. So let's get started, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay. So let's start with the big picture. Azure cloud architecture. Regions, subscriptions, and cost management.
Okay.
This is like the bedrock upon which everything else is built, right?
It really is. I mean, this initial overview is crucial because it sets the stage for understanding how Azure handles its vast infrastructure all around the world,
Right.
to deliver services that are reliable, scalable on a huge level, but also manageable from a budget standpoint.
Okay, so to kind of break that down, we're going to start by looking at Azure regions, which are basically the physical locations of their data centers.
Yeah.
Then we'll get into the different subscription models,
Right.
which are essentially the ways that we as users get access to these services.
Yeah.
And finally, the really important part, we'll dig into the strategies and tools that are there to help keep our cloud costs optimized and under control.
For sure. It's all about grasping the geography of Azure, how you organize things with subscriptions and the financial controls you have.
Perfect. Love it.
Okay, so let's zoom in on that first component, shall we?
Okay.
Azure regions.
Yeah.
Global infrastructure.
Yeah, right.
Now, we talk about the cloud, and it sounds very abstract.
Yeah.
But in reality, Azure has a very real physical presence across the globe.
It's not some ethereal thing up there,
Right.
It's built on a massive network of data centers, and these are strategically placed across the planet.
So when we say Azure region, what are we actually talking about?
Good question. So think of an Azure region as a specific geographic area
Okay.
where Microsoft has clustered together one or more data centers.
Okay.
And these aren't just any data centers. They're interconnected through super high-speed, low-latency networks that closeness and the quality of the network are essential for ensuring good performance, quick response times for all your applications and services.
Yeah, and our source is saying that the scale of this global network is pretty impressive.
It is. Azure currently has over 50 regions, and these span more than 140 countries.
To give you some context, that's a larger global footprint in terms of regions than any other major cloud provider.
Wow.
It shows how committed Microsoft is to making Azure accessible everywhere.
Yeah, and that must mean some pretty good advantages for people using Azure. What are the biggest benefits?
Two main things come to mind. First off, it lets you position your apps and store your data close to your users no matter where they are in the world.
Okay.
That physical proximity means lower latency, faster response times, and overall a much better user experience.
Right. Makes sense.
And secondly, it's crucial for meeting those data residency and compliance requirements.
Ah, yeah.
Lots of industries and governments have strict rules about where specific types of data can be stored and processed.
Of course.
Having all these regions gives you options to pick the ones that fit those legal and regulatory frameworks.
So if I'm setting up a virtual server or a database, I would typically need to choose a specific region for it.
Exactly. When you create most Azure resources, think virtual machines, databases, storage, networking components, whatever it is.
Yeah.
The platform will always ask you to choose the region where you want that resource to physically live.
Okay.
That choice impacts things like performance for users in different parts of the world, how disaster recovery works, and sometimes even the cost of the service.
Okay. And I think I remember reading that there are some exceptions to this whole regional selection thing.
Right.
Services that aren't tied to a specific location.
You're right. Some core services are considered global services, like Azure Active Directory, which manages identity and access.
Okay. Yeah.
Those aren't deployed in a specific region the way a virtual machine would be.
Right.
They operate across Azure's entire infrastructure to provide consistent identity and access management no matter where your other resources are.
Got it. So we've got all these regions around the world, but how does Azure make sure these services stay up and running, even if there's a problem in a particular region?
Good segue. That brings us to our next point.
Perfect.
Regional pairs. Ensuring resilience.
Okay, so this sounds like some kind of built-in safety net.
It absolutely is. Regional pairs are fundamental to Azure's architecture.
Yep.
They focus on making sure things keep running and that you have strong disaster recovery capabilities.
Right.
The basic idea is that every Azure region around the world, except for Brazil South, is paired with another region in the same geographical area.
So it's like each region has a backup buddy.
Exactly. And this pairing isn't random. These regions are carefully chosen to be resilient against those widespread outages that might hit a single region.
Okay, and how does that work? How do they protect against both regions having the same problem?
They try to create a good amount of physical distance between data centers in a pair, usually at least 300 miles.
Okay.
That's meant to lower the chances of a single big event like a natural disaster, civil unrest, power failure, or a major network problem impacting both regions at the same time.
So like if a huge storm hits one region, the paired one is far enough away to probably stay operational.
That's the thinking. The isolation helps minimize the risk of both failing at once, and on top of that, Azure have a clear plan for recovery if there is a really broad outage.
Right.
The goal is to prioritize at least one region in every pair for recovery.
Okay.
So even in a major disruption, there's a path to get things back up and running in that geographical area.
That's good to know that there's that level of redundancy. And I think I read that some services actually replicate data to these paired regions automatically.
You did. Many critical Azure services offer that either as an option or even as the default setting.
Right.
It means your data is constantly being copied to that paired region in the background,
Right.
adding another layer of protection against data loss if something big happens in the primary region.
That's really good to know, but not every service does that automatically, right?
You're right, not all of them do. So it's something to be aware of and configure based on what you need for your applications and data.
Right. Okay, so we've covered the physical locations, the regions, and the regional pairs for reliability, but how do we actually start using these services?
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Slide 4, Azure subscriptions, organizational units.
Okay, so in simple terms, what exactly is an Azure subscription?
Think of it as your key to the Azure kingdom. It's the basic building block for accessing and using all the services. It acts as a billing boundary and a security boundary that's linked to your Azure account.
Okay.
It's how you organize and control access to those cloud resources.
So anything I do in Azure, like setting up a virtual machine or a database, it all has to sit within a subscription?
You got every resource you deploy in Azure, virtual machines, databases, storage networking, anything has to belong to a specific Azure subscription.
Right.
Think of it as its home address in the Azure world.
Perfect. And the guide also highlights how subscriptions affect our billing.
Absolutely. They are central to billing. All your costs for Azure services are tracked and billed per subscription. You get a single combined bill for each subscription at the end of your billing cycle.
So businesses can track their cloud spending for different teams or projects that way?
Exactly. That's a key benefit.
Yeah.
Azure gives you a lot of flexibility in how you set up billing and payments.
Okay.
Organizations can use multiple subscriptions to divide their cloud costs based on how they're structured.
Right.
You could have separate subscriptions for different departments, projects, or even geographic business units.
I see.
This makes it way easier to monitor spending, allocate costs to the right places, and get a clear picture of where your cloud budget is going across the entire organization.
So it's not just about where the invoice goes, but also who can access and manage those resources?
Exactly. Subscriptions also function as a security and administration boundary for controlling access.
Okay.
You decide who has permission to create, manage, and use the resources within a specific subscription.
Got it.
It's vital for security, ensuring different teams have the right access to their environments and stopping unauthorized changes.
Makes sense.
The guide mentioned the subscription ID, which is a unique identifier for each subscription.
Yeah.
It's often needed when you're interacting with Azure programmatically. It's a fundamental part of automation and managing your infrastructure.
Okay.
Think of it as the unique account number for all your Azure stuff.
Okay, great. So subscriptions are essential, these organizational units.
Yeah.
But how do we actually get these subscriptions? Are there different ways to do it?
That's a great question, and it leads us to our next slide.
Okay.
Slide 5, subscription options, finding your fit.
Okay, so are there different ways to subscribe to Azure?
Absolutely. Microsoft offers a range of subscription options designed for different needs.
Okay.
from huge enterprises to individual developers and even students.
Cool.
A common one, especially for larger companies, is the enterprise agreement.
What does that involve?
With an enterprise agreement, big customers commit to spending a specific amount of money on Azure upfront.
Okay.
That amount is then consumed over the year across any Azure services they want. One big plus with enterprise agreements is that they usually have better pricing and a solid service level agreement, or SLA.
Right.
Which, as the guide says, is typically about a 99.95% uptime guarantee every month.
It's pretty good.
It is. This commitment and assurance are really important for those mission-critical systems.
So that's for big companies with ongoing big needs and a desire for stable pricing and high availability. What about smaller companies or individuals with needs that might change more?
For them, going through resellers and partners is usually a better fit.
Okay.
Azure services can be bought through Microsoft's network of resellers using open licensing.
Right.
This is simpler and more flexible. You don't have that huge upfront commitment of an enterprise agreement.
I see.
Plus, organizations can choose to work with Microsoft partners who are experts at designing, implementing, and managing customized Azure solutions.
Okay.
These partners can offer valuable advice support and tailored services to help businesses really maximize their use of Azure.
And I think I saw something about free accounts and options specifically for students.
Yep. Microsoft has great ways for new users to explore Azure and for students to learn these cloud technologies hands-on.
Cool.
If you're new, you can sign up for a free Azure account, which comes with a $200 credit.
Okay.
You can use that to try out different Azure services in the first 30 days.
Nice.
This free account also gives you ongoing free access to a bunch of popular Azure services for a whole year.
Wow.
So you can get comfortable with the platform without spending much money.
That's great.
And for students, there's a special program that gives them $100 in Azure credits for 12 months.
Okay.
They don't even need a credit card to sign up, so it's super accessible.
Perfect. Okay, so we've covered where Azure's infrastructure is and how we get access to it, but now for the million-dollar question, how do we manage and control our spending?
Yes, that's always top of mind, right?
It is.
Let's get into that with slide 6, cost management, monitoring and control.
Okay, now this is where we can hopefully start saving some money.
Definitely, if you don't manage them, cloud costs can become a big expense.
For sure.
Having the right tools and strategies to keep your Azure spending in check is essential.
Totally.
And good news, Azure gives you a full set of cost management features built right into the platform.
So the first thing they mention is being able to explore and analyze your costs. What exactly does that give you?
Azure's cost management tools break down exactly where your money is going in the cloud.
Okay.
You can drill down and see which services, resources, even individual instances are using resources and costing you money.
Okay.
That granular view is the first step to understanding your spending habits and finding places to optimize.
Right, and you can also see your spending trends over time in a broader way.
Yes. You can view the total costs for your entire organization.
Okay.
Or you can filter and analyze costs for specific subscriptions, resource groups, or tagged resources.
Okay.
This helps you see trends. Are your costs going up, down, staying the same?
Right.
You can also track your total spending against your budget forecasts for different time periods, like monthly, quarterly, or annually. It's really helpful for planning and accountability.
Speaking of budgets, our source mentions setting up budgets in Azure. How does that work?
Within Azure Cost Management, you can set specific budget amounts for your subscriptions, resource groups, or even based on tags.
Okay.
This helps you proactively plan and manage your spending according to your financial goals.
Right.
And you can even configure alerts so you're notified when spending hits a certain threshold, like 80% or 100% of your budget.
Okay.
This helps you stay on top of things and prevent going over budget.
So it's not just about looking at past spending, but setting limits for future spending. And what about this advisor recommendations thing that was mentioned for cost management?
Oh, Azure Advisor is a super helpful service.
Okay.
It analyzes your Azure environment all the time and gives you advice in different categories, including how to optimize costs. It can spot idle resources or things that are underutilized and suggest ways to cut costs.
Okay.
Like resizing virtual machines or using different, more cost-effective service tiers. It can also point out opportunities to use reserved instances or the Azure hybrid benefit.
I see.
It's like having a built-in consultant helping you get the most out of your cloud budget.
That sounds super valuable.
Right.
Okay, to really get a handle on tracking and managing costs, let's talk about this next slide.
Okay.
Resource tagging. Organizational strategy.
Right.
This sounds like a way to add more information to our Azure resources, sort of like labels.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's like adding metadata to your resources.
Okay.
Resource tagging means assigning key value pairs called tags to your Azure resources.
Okay.
For example, you could tag a virtual machine with environment, production, or department, marketing.
So how do these simple tags help with managing things and controlling costs?
They're really powerful for organizing and categorizing your resources.
Okay.
First, they make managing resources a lot easier. You can filter, sort, and group things based on tag values,
Yeah.
even if those resources are in different resource groups or subscriptions.
Excellent.
It makes finding and managing related resources much simpler. And the guide specifically mentioned tagging being useful for billing data.
Yes. And why is that?
This is a huge benefit for cost management. When you download your Azure usage and billing reports, you can actually group and analyze the cost data using the tags you've applied.
Oh, wow.
This lets you see your spending broken down by whatever makes sense for your organization,
Right.
like by project, by department, by cost center, or even by application.
Got it.
It gives you a way more detailed and insightful view of where your budget is being used compared to just a basic list of services you're using.
That's way more practical for figuring out what's really driving costs. Are there any best practices for creating and using these tags?
For sure, the key is to have a clear and consistent plan for your tags.
Okay.
One that aligns with your organization's needs and how you want to allocate costs.
Right.
So once you set your tagging standards, like which tags are required and what values are allowed,
Yeah.
you need to make sure those tags are applied to all relevant resources across all your subscriptions.
Right.
You can apply tags to individual resources or to resource groups.
Okay.
But remember, tags on a resource group aren't automatically passed down to the resources inside.
Right.
So be careful to apply them at the right level for complete tracking.
So consistency and a good tagging strategy are really important to get the most out of this for both management and cost control.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now we know how to monitor and track costs. But let's get into some ways to actually reduce those costs.
Let's do it.
This brings us to slide 8, cost optimization strategies.
Right.
This is where we can really see some potential savings.
Hopefully.
Right? So Azure has a few programs and features to help you actively optimize your spending.
Yes.
And the first one mentioned is reservation savings.
Okay.
So how can Azure reservations help us save money?
They let you cut down on costs for certain predictable workloads by committing to a certain amount of capacity.
Okay.
Like for virtual machines, Azure SQL database compute capacity or Azure Cosmos DB throughput, you commit for 1 or 3 years, and in return, you get a big discount compared to the regular pay-as-you-go pricing.
Okay.
The guide says these discounts can be up to 72% off your compute costs.
Wow, that's huge. So if I know I'll need a specific kind of virtual machine running for the next year, it makes sense to reserve it.
Exactly. It's a great option for workloads that are stable and predictable.
Makes sense. And then there's the Azure hybrid benefit. What does that one do?
If you've already got licenses for Windows Server and SQL Server that include software assurance,
All right.
you can use those same licenses for those workloads running in Azure.
Okay.
So you don't have to pay for the licenses twice.
Right.
This can save you a ton on your virtual machines running Windows Server and your Azure SQL databases.
So if you're already using Microsoft stuff on premises, this is a good way to maximize that investment when you move to Azure.
Absolutely.
And
And lastly, the guide talks about benefits for Visual Studio subscribers.
yeah.
Many Visual Studio subscriptions include monthly Azure credits. Developers can use those credits to experiment and build on Azure services,
Right.
so they can create and test new solutions in their own sandbox environment without using up the organization's main Azure subscriptions.
That's nice.
It encourages innovation and helps control development and testing costs.
Yeah.
It's a great resource for developers to learn and explore.
So whether you're a big company with long-term needs, an organization with existing Microsoft licenses, or a developer just trying things out there are solid ways to optimize costs.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered infrastructure access and cost management. Our final slide touches on governing all this at the organizational level.
Right.
Management groups and Azure policy.
Right.
This seems to be about setting up rules and enforcing them at a larger scale.
Yeah. As organizations use Azure more and more, setting up solid governance and making sure everyone follows the rules across all their cloud resources becomes super important.
Right.
And management groups and Azure policy are 2 key services that help you do just that.
Okay, so let's start with management groups. What are they and how do they help organize all those Azure subscriptions?
Management groups add a level of organization above individual subscriptions.
Okay.
They let you group your subscriptions into a flexible structure that reflects your company's organization.
Okay.
You could group by department, by geographic region, by business unit.
Makes sense.
And then you can manage access, apply policies, and view billing and reports at that management group level.
So you're basically putting related subscriptions together under one umbrella.
Exactly. But the real power is that anything you set at the management group level, like access controls or Azure policies, those automatically apply to all the subscriptions underneath.
Wow.
And this goes down through any nested structure you might create.
Okay.
This keeps things consistent across the board, ensures the same policies are applied everywhere, and gives you a single place to check for compliance and overall governance.
That sounds like a huge time saver when you're dealing with a complex Azure environment with lots of subscriptions. So how does Azure Policy fit into all of this?
Azure Policy works hand in hand with this structure by letting you create, assign, and manage policies that enforce rules for your Azure resources.
Okay.
These policies can help make sure your organization follows security standards, industry regulations like HIPAA or GDPR, and your own service level agreements.
Right.
Azure Policy constantly checks your resources and can either stop non-compliant resources from being deployed in the first place, or flag existing resources that aren't following the rules.
I got it.
It's all about being proactive and constantly monitoring your Azure environment.
So management groups set up the structure for organizing our subscriptions, and Azure Policy is how we define and enforce the rules within that structure.
Exactly.
It sounds like a powerful combo for managing Azure at scale while keeping things compliant and under control.
It gives organizations the tools they need to not just use the amazing power and flexibility of the cloud, but also to do it in a controlled, secure, and cost-effective way as they grow.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the core of Microsoft Azure.
Yes.
We looked at the global regions and regional pairs for reliability.
Right.
We unpacked Azure subscriptions.
Yep.
And we uncovered some essential strategies and tools for managing costs and setting up good governance.
It's been a good one.
It really has. And as we've seen, understanding these fundamental parts of Azure architecture is super important for anyone who's either using the platform already or thinking about moving to the cloud. It gives you the knowledge you need to make smart decisions about your cloud strategy, deploying resources, and how you manage everything.
Absolutely.
So for all of you listening, take a minute to think about how you can apply what we talked about today, specifically Azure regions, subscriptions, and cost management. How could you optimize your own projects or your organization setup for better performance and resilience? And what steps could you take to improve how you manage and maybe even reduce your cloud spending?
Good questions.
Maybe you want to check out the Azure pricing calculator or dig into the documentation on Azure Policy.
Those are great places to start.
They are. They're great resources to keep learning. So that brings us to the end of another deep dive.
It does.
We hope this gave you valuable insights and a clearer understanding of how Microsoft Azure works at its core.
I hope so.
Stay tuned for more deep dives into other interesting and important aspects of cloud technology.
For sure.
Until next time, keep learning.
Absolutely.